They came from the horizon, like ghosts rising from the depths of the sea. Fierce warriors clad in bronze, their eyes sharp as the storm, their war cries echoing across the waves. No one knew exactly where they came from, but when they arrived, civilizations crumbled. The mighty Egyptians, the ancient Hittites, the grand cities of the Levant. None were safe. Who were these mysterious invaders, ruthless conquerors, desperate refugees, or something far more complex? This is the story of the Sea Peoples, one of history's greatest enigmas, a force so powerful they reshaped the ancient world and then vanished into legend. Join us as we uncover the truth behind the warriors who changed history and disappeared into the tides of time. For centuries, their origins remained shrouded in mystery. Ancient inscriptions called them the Northern Invaders, but where was this north they hailed from? Some say they came from the Aegean, their homeland lost to disaster. Others point to Anatolia, where wars and famine drove them to seek new lands. The world of the Late Bronze Age was crumbling. Kingdoms that had stood for centuries were falling like dominoes. The once mighty Hittites, rulers of a vast empire, were suddenly no more. Mycenaean Greece, the land of legendary warriors, was burning. Trade collapsed, cities turned to ash, and a desperate tide of people took to the sea, searching for a new home. But these were no mere refugees. They were warriors, organized, armed, and relentless. They didn't just arrive. They conquered. Egypt, Canaan, Cyprus, Ugarit. No kingdom was safe from their wrath. But why did they leave their lands behind? Was it war, famine, natural disaster, or something even more ominous, an unstoppable force that drove entire civilizations to ruin? The answers remain buried in the ruins of history. But what we do know is that their arrival would change the course of the ancient world forever. The sea was restless. The winds howled through the sails of hundreds of warships, their prows cutting through the waves like sharpened blades. On board stood warriors, strong, fearless, battle-hardened men. Their armor glistened under the sun, their weapons ready. They had already burned cities, toppled kingdoms, and crushed armies. Now only one great power remained between them and total domination: Egypt. For years, these invaders, known to history as the Sea Peoples, had moved like an unstoppable force across the eastern Mediterranean. They struck Mycenaean Greece, leaving behind ruins where once stood mighty palaces. They laid waste to the Hittite Empire, erasing one of the most powerful civilizations of the Bronze Age. Cities that had thrived for centuries, Ugarit, Ashkelon, Byblos, were reduced to smoldering rubble. From the north, from lands unknown, they came. No king could stop them, no army could withstand them. Their enemies sent desperate pleas for help. Letters scratched onto clay tablets, begging for reinforcements. But none came. By the time their messages reached distant lands, their cities had already fallen. Now they turned their gaze southward to Egypt, the final challenge, the last empire still standing. But Pharaoh Rameses III was not like the others. He would not beg for aid. He would not surrender. He would fight. Rameses III had seen the destruction with his own eyes. He knew what was coming. He had heard the whispers of fallen cities, had read the desperate warnings from rulers who no longer lived to tell their tale. But Egypt was different. Egypt was ready. The pharaoh ordered his armies to fortify the cities along the Nile, setting traps for the enemy. He positioned his archers along the riverbanks, their bows drawn. their arrows dipped in deadly poison. And most importantly, he prepared his navy. Egypt would not fight this war on land alone. Rameses III knew that the Sea People's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They relied on the sea. They traveled on great warships, swift and deadly. Their warriors trained to fight on land after reaching the shore. But what if they never made it that far? The pharaoh devised a plan. He would lure them in, make them believe they were heading for an easy victory, just as they had in so many battles before. And then, when they least expected it, he would strike. The sky darkened as the horizon filled with enemy ships. The Sea Peoples had arrived, their fleet stretched as far as the eye could see, their warriors eager for battle. They rowed forward, unaware that they were sailing into a trap. And then the ambush began. From the riverbanks, Egyptian archers unleashed a storm of arrows, raining death upon the enemy. Their projectiles pierced armor, struck warriors down before they could even draw their swords. The first wave of invaders fell into the water, their bodies sinking beneath the waves. Then came the second strike. Egyptian warships, larger and heavier, moved in swiftly, their crews trained for naval combat. The Sea Peoples were used to boarding enemy ships, fighting hand to hand, but they were not prepared for what happened next. Egyptian sailors used grappling hooks, latching onto enemy vessels and pulling them close. Warriors leapt onto the decks of the invading fleet, hacking and slashing through their ranks. Ships collided, warriors fell into the water, some drowning, others desperately trying to swim to safety, only to be cut down by Egyptian soldiers waiting on the shores. The Nile turned red with blood. The Sea Peoples, for the first time in their unstoppable campaign, were losing. They had faced armies before, they had burned cities before, but they had never fought an enemy that knew the land, knew the waters, and knew how to fight them on their own terms. The battle raged for hours. By the time the sun began to set, the once mighty fleet of the Sea Peoples lay in ruins. The survivors, those who had not been cut down or drowned, were captured. The invasion had failed. Egypt had survived. The defeat at the hands of Rameses III may have halted their advance, but it did not erase them from history. Some groups vanished, slipping into obscurity, their names lost to time. But others, they adapted, they changed, they settled. Among these survivors were the Peliset, a name recorded in Egyptian inscriptions. Today we know them as the Philistines. These former warriors did not return to the sea. Instead, they built fortified cities along the coasts of Canaan, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. Unlike the Canaanites, who lived there before them, their culture bore signs of an Aegean past. Their pottery, their weapons, even the way they prepared their food, it all pointed to a people who had once roamed the Mediterranean. A people displaced by the collapse of the Bronze Age, now forging a new identity in a new land. For centuries, the great civilizations of the Bronze Age had stood unchallenged. The Hittites, rulers of Anatolia, controlled vast lands and powerful armies. Mycenaean Greece, the land of warriors and legends, was thriving. The great cities of the Levant, Ugarit, Byblos, Hazor, were centers of trade, wealth, and power. And then it all fell apart. One by one, kingdoms burned, the Hittite Empire gone. The Mycenaean palaces abandoned, the cities of the Levant reduced to ashes. It was not just war that brought them down, it was something far greater. Famine, drought, rebellion, trade routes collapsing, economies failing, once loyal subjects turning against their kings. The world of the Bronze Age did not fall because of the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples were simply one piece of a much larger catastrophe, a force both shaped by the chaos and adding to it. They were not the cause of destruction, they were the survivors of it. And when the dust settled, when the old powers had fallen, a new world emerged, a world where mighty Assyria and Babylon would rise from the ruins. A world where new peoples, the Israelites, the Arameans, the Phoenicians, would carve out their place in history. And the sea peoples, they became a legend. Were they conquerors? Were they refugees? Were they mercenaries, moving from war to war, seeking fortune in a world on the brink? Who were they? The answer is not simple. They were not a single nation, nor did they speak a single language. They were a confederation, a loose alliance of groups, each with its own history, its own motives, and its own destiny. Egyptian and Hittite records give us names: Luka, Karkia, Peleset, Shekelesh, Shurdan, Weshesh, Ekwesh, Denyen, Jekka. But behind these names lies a deeper mystery. The Luka were among the most notorious of these groups. Their homeland lay in southwestern Anatolia, in the region later known as Lycia, but they were never bound to one place. Hittite and Egyptian records describe them as raiders, rebels, and pirates, striking coastal cities and disappearing back into the sea. They were known for their independence, often fighting on both sides of conflicts. They joined the Asua Confederation against the Hittites, but later fought alongside the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh against Egypt. Unlike centralized kingdoms, the Luka had no single ruler. They operated as independent bands, making them unpredictable and difficult to control. They were not part of a great migration, but rather a people who thrived in the unstable world of the late Bronze Age, exploiting war and collapse to their advantage. The Karkia, another group mentioned in Hittite and Egyptian records, lived in western Anatolia. They were not a kingdom, but were governed by a council of chiefs, which made them politically fragmented yet resilient. They had dealings with the Hittite Empire, but were never fully integrated into it. Their loyalty shifted depending on circumstances, sometimes fighting for the Hittites, as at the Battle of Kadesh, but maintaining their own interests. Some scholars suggest a possible connection between the Karkia and the later region of Caria, though the linguistic link remains uncertain. They were a people of shifting alliances, a reminder that not all of the so-called sea peoples were outsiders. Some were deeply rooted in the lands they later helped destabilize. Among the most well-known groups were the Peleset, whom many historians identify with the later Philistines. Egyptian inscriptions from the reign of Ramesses III describe the Peleset as one of the groups defeated in the Great Sea People's invasion, but unlike other groups, they did not disappear after their failed attempt to conquer Egypt. Instead, they settled along the coast of Canaan, establishing cities such as Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. Archaeological evidence suggests that they originated from the Aegean cultural sphere, possibly from Crete or Cyprus, as indicated by their pottery known as Philistine bichrome ware, which closely resembles Mycenaean and Cypriot styles. Genetic studies also suggest an influx of people with European ancestry into Philistine settlements at the beginning of the Iron Age. Over time, however, the Peleset intermarried with local Canaanite populations and developed a distinct identity. Their story is not one of simple conquest, but of adaptation and integration, as they became one of the dominant groups in the region. The Shekelesh appear in Egyptian records as mercenaries, fighting alongside the Libyan ruler Merie against Pharaoh Meneptah. They were not part of the main Sea People's invasion of Egypt, but played a role in earlier conflicts. Some scholars speculate that they may have been connected to Sicily based on the phonetic similarity between Shekelesh and Sicily, though there is no definitive proof of this. It is unclear whether Sicily was their place of origin or if they migrated there after the Bronze Age collapse. Unlike the Peleset, they left no known cities or settlements behind, and their fate remains uncertain. The Shurdan were another group whose name appears frequently in Egyptian records. They were first mentioned during the reign of Ramesses II as sea raiders attacking Egypt's coast, but rather than being wiped out, they were defeated and later incorporated into the Egyptian military. Ramesses II used them as elite warriors, and they served as part of his personal guard. Their origins are debated, with some scholars suggesting a connection to the Nuragic civilization of Sardinia, based on similarities in weaponry, architecture, and artifacts found in both regions. Nuragic pottery has been discovered at sites such as Pyla Kokinokremos in Cyprus, suggesting some link between Sardinia and the wider Mediterranean world at the time. If the Shurden did originate from Sardinia, it is likely that they were displaced by the same forces that disrupted societies across the region, leading some to turn to raiding and mercenary service. Among the most enigmatic of the sea peoples were the Weshesh. They appear only in inscriptions from the reign of Ramesses III, and unlike the other groups, there are no known depictions of them in Egyptian art. No artifacts, no settlements, no monuments, only a name recorded in the aftermath of their defeat. Who were they? Where did they come from? Their identity remains one of the great mysteries of this period. Two other names, Ekwesh and Dennian, have led to speculation about a possible Greek connection. Some scholars suggest that the Ekwesh may be linked to the Achaeans, the people known from Homer's Iliad as the warriors who fought at Troy. The Dennian, likewise, bear a resemblance to the name Danaans, another term used in Greek epic poetry for Mycenaean Greeks. If these connections are correct, it would mean that some of the sea peoples were not foreign invaders, but rather displaced Mycenaeans, fleeing the collapse of their own civilization. The fall of Mycenaean palace centers and the widespread destruction in Greece during this period suggest that many warriors may have taken to the sea in search of new lands and opportunities, whether as mercenaries, raiders, or settlers. The Cheka, another group mentioned in Egyptian sources, may have originally been traders before becoming raiders. They later settled in Canaan, establishing a stronghold in the city of Dor. Unlike the Peliset, who formed a lasting presence in the region, the Cheka eventually faded from power, overtaken by new forces as the Iron Age progressed. Their transition from merchants to warriors reflects the instability of the time, when economic collapse and political fragmentation forced many to adopt new identities in order to survive. The Sea Peoples were not a single people, nor did they share a common goal. Some were conquerors, some were refugees, some were mercenaries, and some were opportunists navigating a world in crisis. They did not bring down the Bronze Age civilizations on their own, but they were part of a much larger collapse, one driven by a combination of climate change, famine, internal rebellions, and shifts in trade networks. By the time the dust settled, the great empires of the Bronze Age, Mycenae, the Hittite Empire, the city-states of the Levant, had either fallen or dramatically weakened. In their place, new powers would rise: Assyria, Babylon, Israel, and Phoenicia, shaping the world of the Iron Age. And the Sea Peoples? Some, like the Philistines, adapted and became part of history. Others vanished, their names preserved only in the records of the civilizations they once fought against. Were they the architects of destruction, or merely its survivors? Perhaps we will never know. But what is certain is that for a brief moment they stood at the center of history, and then, as suddenly as they had arrived, they disappeared into the tides of time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more fascinating content that enriches your knowledge and takes you on a journey through history, ancient civilizations, and untold stories of the past. See you in the next video.